Okay, into the Word, into the world, Bible study. Amen. All right. Woo, woo, woo. Okay. All right, we're excited about learning God's Word. That's where all this enthusiasm comes from. And we're going to get it now into a very well-known and very insightful book in the Bible, and that's Job. And we've all heard of Job. And so we're going to delve into, never really get an answer why Job goes through what he goes through. So we don't get a full answer in the scripture as to why he goes through what he goes through. But we're challenged. We're challenged to try to understand why Job is going through what he's going through, and his relationship with God, and his relationship with his wife and his friends is what we're actually trying to do here. Okay, so let's get into it. Job chapter 1 is where we should take off at. And the first section between Job 1 and Job 2, chapter 1 and chapter 2, is talking about the circumstances of Job. The first assault of Satan, the second assault of Satan, and the arrival of Job's friends. So that's what happens in chapter 1 and chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, we start the debates. The debates that go on between Job and his first speech, Eliphaz's speech, Job's response to Eliphaz, and then Bildad's first speech, and his friends start to talk, and they have this dialogue or this debate going back and forth. So it's a story of debates about God and suffering, and what is the cause of suffering is one of the key questions in Job. So let's get started here with Job chapter 1, and let's set the stage by understanding what the circumstances are. So if someone will read Job 1, chapter 1, verse 1 through 5, and we'll get a sense of he and his family.
In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom.
Okay, so now, as we talked yesterday's class about understanding Jonah's personality and understanding him as a person, let's now today get in the issue of Job and who he is as a person, as a human being, and someone who's relating to God. So what do you see thus far in Job's circumstances? How do you see Job thus far?
Well, it says that he was a blameless and upright man who feared God and shunned evil. Yeah. So he tried to live right.
Okay. What about his financial status? What do you see in his financial status?
If you count it today, he was very rich.
Yeah.
If you...
Yeah. He was wealthy.
Yeah, very wealthy.
He was wealthy, yeah. Dr. Jackson, you're going to say something?
I noticed that Job was a good parent. He had reared his children, and he wanted them to follow God the way he did. Mm-hmm. And he was so protective of their souls that he actually would intercede in their behalf before God. So as a mother of 4 sons, I can empathize with Job and just say he was a good parent. He had to stay on his knees before God for his children. So he was a good parent.
Yeah, we see that, don't they? Something else you want to say then?
Yeah. I know that it sounds like the third party talking about he was blameless and upright, but the main thing, he feared God. Yeah, that's between he and God. He feared God, which is greater than what he was the burnt offerings for his sons and daughters.
And so then when we read that verse, and it says that, it's verse 3, he said he was the greatest of all people of the East. You know, so he was an exceptional person in his relationship to God, in the prosperity that he had. And so then it also gives the hint of the theology. If you're wealthy and doing well, then it's very likely it's a reflection of your relationship with God. If you're healthy, the theology in that day is that evidently you are without sin. So then, what's the opposite of that then? So I'm going to speak to that then.
Well, if you don't have anything, you must have done something wrong to not have anything. And so you sinned. That was what you did wrong. You sinned. And so God is paying you back for not living right.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the theology was. If you're doing well, then evidently you are blameless before God. If you are suffering, then evidently you're suffering as the consequences of what you've done wrong, where you sinned. And so that's really the part of the drama and the debate between between Job and his friends, is trying to justify why he's suffering. You know, so they'll eventually ask him, well, you need to just go on and confess. You know, you must have done something, you know, for all this calamity to come in your life. And we talked about this yesterday, and it tends to be still our tendency today, is that if someone's suffering, we want to find out what they do wrong. There must have been something to cause them to have this situation. And so we find that that is one of the paradigms and one of the theologies that was in that day that's we're really wrestling with. You know, is that happening? And there's another major one that comes up here too we're going to get into. Okay, so we find the status of Job. We find the condition he's in. Everything is going well in his life. Now we have the events start to occur. Verse 6 through 12, someone?
This is Job's first test. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He's blameless, upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied, "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hand, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he says, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger...
Let's pause there. You went through 12, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, so now we're finding out, what do you think of this dialogue between Satan, or what is more correctly referred to as the accuser? And that's how the Hebrews saw him, not the Satan that we know in the New Testament, but he is the accuser, the adversary. How do you see this dialogue between Satan and God? Because that's always, many times, it's troubling for us that there would be this conversation, that God would allow this to happen. What are some of your feelings about this whole idea of this conversation?
Sound like there's an agreement between Satan and God for a test. Only for a test. I use the word agreement because it was a challenge, but a test, a challenge, a test of challenge. I'll put it that way. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, but just between God and...
Yeah, that's true. That's a statement of fact. There is a testing. But what I'm wanting you to probe a little deeper is, how do you feel about the fact that there's even this test that God is authorizing? You know, is God now having a conversation with Satan, saying, take a look at Dr. Jackson, Rosalie Jackson, she's one of my better, And if you allow me to do this and this to her, then see if she still curse you. Is God still doing that? What about this whole idea that there's even this conversation? Any thoughts about that?
I still think God is God, whether Satan has power or not. God is still God. And I think it's a pre-plan somewhere with God. If God knows everything, he knows the results of everything. If God knows everything, he knows the beginning and the end. So I feel, long as you don't, it was very important for him to tell Satan not to touch Job, not to touch Job. But God had already knew, I think, the situation, how it would come out. Yeah, okay. That's what I feel.
Because we know he does touch him later on. Okay, he does touch Job later on. Yeah. So he doesn't touch him at first, but then later on he says, now then, if you're taking these properties away from him, but now if you touch him, then he will. So there's two levels of this challenge that occurs, and so we're seeing the first interaction between Satan and God. Okay, so now then, someone take us in first chapter 13 through the end, verse 22. Verse 13 through 22.
Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped, and he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong.
Okay, so now we're continuing on talking about, we're in Job now, the book of Job, and we're hearing now this first taking away of Job. And speaking of Job now, what do we still see, or what do you still see as Job's character, Job's sense of who he is and what's going on?
He continues to act as a regular person, doesn't spite God or curse at him. He acts as if it's going to happen. Whatever happened is what God wants it to happen. So he's just going to see what it pans out to be and not judge God for what he's doing.
Okay, so he was accepting it, right? He was okay with it. He's not going to curse God. I'm not going to blame God for what happened. You know, naked I came into the world, naked I shall leave. You know, this happens in life, is his approach. And so then, you know, that's a very noble viewpoint, isn't it?
Mature.
Very spiritual. Yeah.
It shows a maturity of character in Job, that he is able to face the adversity and be stable and stand really like the man he is, a man of integrity, a man who still believes that that somehow God is going to work it out.
And you notice also, it's almost like they started with each of these 4 different things that came at Job, started with something small and ended up with something large to get maybe by attacking his family or telling him that his family is gone, that would just really be the straw that would break the camel's back, and that would make Job react in a different manner instead of remaining the faithful man of God that he is.
Yeah, so there was an escalation, and that's what we're finding. First material things, and now people, important people in my family are now being taken away. So it's escalating here and what's going on, and we find that happening here. And so we find out Job is still firm in his faith. He does, however, have emotions, though, doesn't he? He's not detached from all that he's lost. And so what does that tell us about, when we have loss, how we then might respond? Because in verse 20 it says, then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshiped. And so he's not detached from the losing of these children. That's not it at all. He loves his children, as we saw earlier. And so he's impacted by the loss of his children. But it is a profound statement on his faith. That even with that. And so naked I came into the world, naked I will return. And so God gives and God takes away. And then says, bless the name of the Lord. Now that's tough, isn't it? You done lost all your children, all your possessions, and you end up with a response, blessed is the name of the Lord. So yeah, very mature, very sound in his faith. Okay, now it's not over here, is it? No. That's not the end of it. So let's now go take a look at chapter 2. This is the second assault on Job now. And it's still continuing to escalate now. All right. So someone take Job chapter 2, 1 through 10. Someone read that.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth in the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his feet unto the crown. And he took him a potsherd and scraped himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips.
All right. Okay, we're talking about the character of Job. And what do we see in the character of this man? Okay, what's your feelings about Job now?
That he still remains faithful to the Lord, without cursing him by mouth nor feeling, or showing any emotion that God is to blame for the things that he's going through. That it's just a test of his faith.
Yeah. And one of the words they use is integrity. That means, how do you respond when it's good, and how do you respond when it's bad? And do you behave one way when it's good, but then another way when it gets bad? And a person of integrity tends to stay more level. Good times and bad times, they're pretty even. But it's the person who is not as integritous. When something goes wrong, then they've gone wide left. They're just out there now. And so we see the integrity of him as a person, the integrity of his faith that stays intact. So Job's quite a person, isn't he? Quite a person. Now, let's talk about this escalation. You mentioned about how it's escalating and things have taken away from him. How do you feel about the fact that now Job's physical self has now been attacked? What do you think about that?
I think that he took him to his worst point, like, I'm going to take you almost to the point of death to see if you're still going to turn against me, and he still didn't turn against me. He felt as if I'm going to die like this, at least I live my life right by God, if he's going to take me in death as this way or take my physical health.
Says something very interesting in him. I'm going to do this until death. Speak to us, someone's viewpoint on staying faithful even to death. What does that mean to you, to stay faithful even to death regardless of your circumstances?
Well, I think remarkable about Job in the test of his character, he keeps focusing on God. I noticed that there's no dialogue about him complaining and whining, and even though he spoke to his wife and put her in her place in a perspective, there's no dialogue about him complaining about the sores. They say he scratched himself and he sat down and what have you, but he really kept looking up and focusing on God, and I think that's a great lesson here for us, for me. Yes. Because many times when trouble comes, the first thing we do is stop coming to church. We stop going around people of God. We turn into ourselves in depression, and therefore we're isolated from the help that we could get. But Job, as it's reported here, he keeps on talking about what God is and what God can do, which shows a man of character. Yeah. And that's what integrity is, character. Yeah. And so that's what struck me about it.
It's interesting. I was thinking about one thing. A lot of times when a person have death in their family and they do withdraw and they want to be by themselves, but instead of coming around and fellowshipping with others, it would help you. I was just thinking about it when he said to Dell, but I also just think of the difference in Job and Jonas from last night, because when you compare the two persons, Jonah always wanted to hurry and die anytime anything happens, so it's quite a contrast.
That's a very good point. We were talking about Jonah
like
last
Dr.
night.
Jackson said, he was whining, and everything, but Job, none of that.
Yeah. So it is a good comparison, isn't it? Because Jonah, even when the tree died, Jonah got so angry he said he was ready to die. Just because his shade went away. And so we have the character of Jonah, which is a very good comparison. The character of Jonah, whenever there was an issue, then he was ready to die. But now we have Job, who has lost everything, including his health, but he's standing firm in his faith. You're going to say something, Jamila.
Yeah, basically it's a test to basically neither of us, no one knows when their day is done. Mm-hmm. So basically you have to walk in faith until he snatches you, and you never know when that day comes. So you continuously stay faithful regardless of any circumstance or situation that occurs in your life, whether it be good or bad. You still have to give God the glory for everything that's going on, because there's a reason for it and behind it.
Yes. And we never know how. Well, let's go to James, all the way back to the book of James, because that one always speaks to this issue here. So you go all the way back in the back there and you get to James. Chapter 1 is where you want to find yourself. James is before you get to the 1 Peter and the 2 Peter. It's after Hebrews in the New Testament. Okay? And chapter 1, okay, verses 2 through 4. So, someone who has that, if you would read it.
Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develop perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything.
Okay, there you go. So that's something, isn't it? So what they're saying here is pretty much of a stretch to say in the midst of tribulation, you count it as joy. Now that's a bit of a challenge, let's put it that way. God's word is true. That's a challenge in the midst of tribulation to consider it joy. But we have a reason why. And it goes on to say, because you know that the testing of your faith, mine says, produces endurance. So when I'm getting tested, I'm getting stronger in my faith. And then it goes on to say, and let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete and lacking in nothing. So therefore now you're a strong, complete, mature person of faith, and you're lacking in nothing. You can now testify to other people. You can now encourage other people. They look at your walk, you know, and then admire your faith, and then inquire, you know, what gives you this kind of faith? And it's a wonderful opportunity then to testify to others. You know, somebody was going to say something. Yeah.
To me, somewhere in his life, he has sat down and just made it in his soul that his faith was greater than his circumstances would ever be. I think he came to that conclusion. You have to, because if it run up on you, you might do anything. But I think he took time in his life somewhere. There was a young man, it's a story, I'll do it real quick. He was a football player. He was a star in college. He was in an accident in the car. He got burned real bad. So it disfigured his face. He came back home to live with his mom after he got out of the hospital. He took every credit card she had and he explored it very much. He started doing things that his mom never knew he could do. It's just that he made a complete turnaround, started feeling sorry for himself. He had no faith in himself or God or anything that he had before while he was in college doing really good, you know. Very smart and intelligent guy. But he made a circle because he started.
So his went the other way.
Yeah.
His went the other
A lot of us do that if our faith is smaller than the circumstances that we went through.
And that's a good point too, because you know, we just explored on how wealthy he was, how much he had, how he was seen, and God even referred to him as perfect, as a perfect person, you know. And so it's interesting then, is one's faith tied to their possessions and their status, or is your faith independent of your financial and your physical situation? And many times when that person has the financial tragedy or the tragedy of someone who's passed in your life, you find there's a parting, that their faith was connected to what they had. And when that leaves, they're gone. And the one kind of thing I may have mentioned to you before, when I first started in the ministry, and the pastor who was teaching me how to go about and do sick visits, we went to the floor at the hospital where the walls were padded and the doors were locked. It was a psychiatric ward. And we went in and talked to the woman who was depressed, and we noticed on both wrists had been bandaged where she had slit both wrists. And we got to talking to her, trying to encourage her, and he said, well, you know, I know you're here to encourage me, but I just want to die. He said, you know, I just want to die. And so then we explored a little further, and what we found out was she lost her job, and her child moved away. Not out of any bad circumstances. Her child just grew up and went on and lived on their own. She was so attached to that job, and she was so attached to that child, that the losing of that job, the child just moving away, there was no reason for her to live. And so she tried to end it. And so there's someone who was connected to those two things. And when those two things were challenged or removed, then it was it for her. She was done. She was ready to end her life. And so we have to, you know, sometimes keep in our mind, you know, what is causing our faith? Is our faith tied to the love of God and to what Christ has done? Or is our faith dependent upon our possessions and what we have? And so that is part of the impetus of what we see going on here thus far. Job's faith was tied to God, irrespective of his circumstances, conditions. And Paul speaks to that. You know, he said he's learned how to be content in all circumstances. You know, I've had much and I've had little, Paul says. But he's learned to be content. In other words, learned to have a faith in having a lot or having a little. And so then that is what we find. Friends. These so-called friends of Job, all right? And don't be too harsh on his friends, because they're human and they have their own thoughts. Okay, verse 11 through 13. Someone read that for us then. Chapter 2, 11 through 14.
Three of Job's friends were Elazarus, the Determinate, Bildad, the Shuhite, the Zophar, the Manathite. When they heard of the tragedy he had suffered, they got together and traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust into the air over their heads to demonstrate their grief. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights, and no one said a word, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words.
Okay, let's pause there then. Now, what's your first impression of his friends?
That they felt the pain that he was going through, and they wanted him to understand that we're here to comfort you in any way that we can, and we're letting you know that we share that same feeling with you, and we're going to strip ourselves just as you've done.
Yes.
Because they all share the same faith. So they demonstrated stripping of the robe just the same as he did.
Yeah. So that not only just to go and observe him, and we heard word about him, so I'm going to go and check and see for myself. You know, I heard that was going on with him, so I'm going to go by and see for myself what's going on with Job. That was not their intent, was it? You know, and your point was very astute, and that is, we identify with you, and we're going to show that we identify with you. And so, what did Jesus do when he found out that Nazareth had died? Anyone remember his response? What did Jesus do when he found out that Lazarus had died?
First thing he did, he wept.
Yes.
They were, everybody else that was close to him wondered, you know, this man really loved Lazarus.
Yeah. And so there's a sense of identifying with and empathy. And Jesus knew he was going to heal him and he was going to raise him. But, you know, that's sometimes the best thing that we can do for someone is to empathize with them, to just sit with them. And I was told a long time ago, when someone's grieving and you feel, you know, to go over and visit with them, sometimes you don't have to say a lot. You know, sometimes just your presence being there, just sitting with them to show that you're concerned about them, that you came by, because they traveled to get to him, didn't they? And when they saw him from a distance, they were impacted, you know, by the fact that they didn't even recognize him. And then they responded that way. So these appear to be good friends, don't they? Yeah. They sound like they really are there. What did you think about the fact that how long they sat before they said anything?
7 days and nights.
Now, let's be truthful.
That's what they.
How long will we last?
You saying us individually?
Yeah. How long will we last?
Without saying anything, I truthfully, maybe 7 to 8 hours. You know, because I mean,
You're pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean,
it lasted that long.
Yeah.
I mean, because like the situation that happened with my friend, I brought her to church one time, and her father, and she had joined, but she never kind of came back. But her mother, she had lost her mother in July of 2010, and her mother was young. She was about 41 years old when she died. And, you know, my friend, she's only a year older than me. And I knew her mother, you know, and she was kind of like a mom / auntie, took us to concerts, you know, things like that. And I didn't have words to say for a long time, and the only thing that I could do was just let her cry on me as much as she could, her and her sister, because we all grew up together. And so it was real tough on them, and it's like, I can't share your pain. The only thing that I can do is just be here, because I don't know what it's like to lose a mother in a sense of death. I know how to be detached from my mother because I wasn't raised by my biological mother, but there's no way I can compare that feeling. But the only thing I can do is just be there and be sympathetic to their feelings and their emotions.
Yeah. And many times, well, anybody else, how long will you think you would last before you started talking? You traveled all the way to see this person who's grieving. How long would you just sit and say nothing?
It depends, because sometimes you feel like if you do say something, you might cause a commotion. So as long as they're quiet, you stay quiet too. Because maybe they might be praying, they might be trying to humble themselves. You never know what the circumstances may be, so you don't interrupt until they take the vow to say something first, or to express that they're ready to talk, because they might not be ready to say anything or to hear anything.
Being sensitive to when they're ready to talk, and then you start talking. Okay. Yeah.
I would have been okay with the not speaking part, but the sitting on the ground part, I wouldn't have lasted long. I mean, I probably would have been 30 minutes, and I'd have to get up, but I would really be okay with the not talking.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we learned a lesson in that, and to comfort someone, our presence speaks volumes. The fact that you made the effort to go by, to be with them, and to be more sensitive to their needs, and Eugene mentioned that, if they're not ready to talk, then don't require them to talk, because one of the things that, we'll dwell here just for a second or two more, when someone has had a loved one to pass, then we know what happens, don't they? Everyone starts to call out of good intentions. And so what they have to do is retell the story over and over and over again with each new person. They have to relive it. And so I think it is a comforting not to require them to tell the story yet one more time when we come, and just to be with them. It's difficult for us to sit still and not speak, but it's also a very, very comforting and very considerate posture and position when someone is really grieving in that situation. Okay? All right, now we've gone through Job, where he started, where he went through, his faithfulness, his friends have come. It seems like everything's pretty well set now, doesn't it? As well as it can be. Okay, now let's get into chapter 3. Here's where Job's first speech takes effect. Let's take Job 1 through 18. Job chapter 3, verses 1 through 18.
Job speaks. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said, a boy is born. That day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it. May darkness and deep shadow claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm its light. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, not be entered in any of the months. May that night be barren. May no shout of joy be heard in it. May those who curse days curse that day. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan. May its moving star become dark. May it wait for daylight in vain, and not see the first days of dawn. For it did not shut the doors of the womb on me, to hide trouble from my eyes. Why did I not perish at birth, and die as I came from the womb? Why were these knees to receive me, and breast that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace, I would be asleep and at rest, with kings and counselors of the earth who built for themselves places now lying in ruins, with rulers who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn baby, like an infant who never saw the light of day? There the wicked cease from turmoil, and there the weary are at rest. Captives also enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave drivers shout.
Okay. What's going on with Job now?
He's starting to question God, wondering, why he do this to me now instead of taking me before I was born, but to end up in this road is supposed to just not having to come in the first place. You should have took me before I made it here instead of taking me down this long journey and road before I feel like I'm going to die. I should just die from the beginning.
Yeah. What's your feelings about Job now? Has your opinion about Job changed?
Kind of, because he's starting to question God opposed to keeping his faith still as before. At first, he never questioned God. He just kept his faith always because God wants this to happen. I'm going to take this as it comes, opposed to now he's wondering, asking God's question like, why now? Or why did you do it this time instead of before? Or was I the only person? Or should it have been somebody else? Should somebody took my place? Or anything like that. So I don't think he's still feeling the same. So he kind of gave me a different feeling as he doesn't trust God. He just wanted to know what the reason is for it now.
Yeah, okay. Is that unusual? No, it isn't, is it? When we're in the midst of pain, and we find Jesus doing that, remember? When Jesus said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so when you're in pain and suffering, it is a natural thing to lash out and say, why? Why is this going on? And so then we find this very faithful man, who even at a point of pain, just like Jesus, starts to question why. Why is this happening to me? So then, yes, go ahead.
Job, to me, he sounds more like he's not cursing God, but he's cursing the day of his birth. Although he realized God is his creator, mm-hmm. He cursed the day of his birth. Mm-hmm. He's not cursing his first love. He's just cursing, why was I born? Yeah. Would it have been better for God and everybody else if I had not been born? Yeah. I believe.
Yeah, so he's cursing the fact that he was ever born in the midst of that kind of pain. And it accumulates after a while, doesn't it? Doesn't it kind of settle in? Where now all of a sudden you start to reflect on everything that's been lost. I've lost everything. I've lost my income, my prosperity, the job that kept me going. I've lost my children who I loved and prayed for and interceded for. And now here I am out here covered in boils from head to toe. Yeah.
It just shows us that he was in a very, very dark place.
Yeah.
And all that he had, he knew that it all came from God. But I think sometimes too that we sometimes can take things for granted, and maybe he had started to do that just a little bit, but he's in a place where he's never been before, and it's just very, very dark where he is, and he sees no way out. Mm-hmm. Because he was faithful to God. Mm-hmm. And if I'm faithful to you, God, why is all of this happening to me, of all people? Yeah. Me.
Yeah. And you can see him start to recount in his mind, remember how I, worshiped you and how I was faithful to you, and I even interceded for my children, and just in case they were partying too much, I've hit all the right buttons. I've done all the right things, but yet, look at where I am. Yeah, you're going to say something.
I was just going to point out the fact that weariness, he's getting tired, and this is a good reminder for us. This has been going on now a long time. Remember, the friends sat 7 days, and in those days it took a long time for the word to get around to different communities. So I don't know how far the friends lived away, but Job has been suffering now for at least a month or so. I don't know, but I know that when sickness comes, you expect to get well. When trouble comes, you expect it to go away. But now the weariness is setting in. When you get tired, then you begin to be despair. Despair will set in. That's a human quality, and it may not have anything to do with God. It has to do with the fact that I'm tired. Yeah. This has been going on a while, and now I begin to be introspective and look to say, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. Why was I even in the first place? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to use this setting because just a few of us here. But when I came home from the hospital, all my brothers and it's 12 of us, they all came to see me. They waited every other 2 weeks, then here come another one. Then here come, they were flying in to see me. I wanted them to be quiet so much. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to, I would answer them, whatever they asked me, but talking bothered me. Every one of them wanted to talk. constantly. And this is something I've sat with people that had chemo and cancer before, but it had never happened to me, so it was something new to me. And like Dr. Jackson said, when you get tired, you're tired. You don't want to hear what he did in Cleveland last week, and I can understand now when people are at their lowest.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear a lot of talking or nothing, I've been with people that I've gone to sit with those that lost a loved one. And I want to tell them myself, will you be quiet? She don't want to hear all that talking. And it's just experiences in life that you remember your lowness.
Yeah.
And
that then goes back to that James account, that through that tribulation comes endurance and also comes maturity. Because like I said, now having gone through what you've gone through, you can really empathize what it is to have prolonged illness that is very dire possibilities and how that person feels, and the fact that, they just want to be quiet. They just want to have quiet. They don't want to talk. And so we want to be mindful of that because, I've been in situations where people are sick and there's just a whole lot of conversation, a lot of chatter, and it's not about us. It really is not about us. It's not about what we want to talk about, what we want to say, And, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning, That's not the kind of conversation to have with this person, It rains on the just and the unjust, That's not the kind of conversation you want to have with someone. And so, but then we get to see why, too, as we start to get into now chapter 4, starting in verse 1, we now have Eliphaz speaks. And now the friend, after 7 days and 7 nights, they're now starting to speak to their friend Job. And so will someone take us, chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. Okay, go ahead.
Then Eliphaz the Temanite replied to Job, will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out? In the past you have encouraged many a troubled soul in trusting God. You have supported those who were weak. Your words have strengthened the fallen. You steadied those who wavered. But now, when trouble strikes you, faint and when trouble strikes you, you faint and are broken. Those reverence of God gives you no confidence. Shouldn't you believe that God will care for those who are upright? Stop and think. Does the innocent person perish? When has the upright person been destroyed? My experience shows that who plant trouble and the cultivate evil will harvest the same. They perish by a breath from God. They vanish in a blast of his anger. Through the fierce young lion, they will be broken and destroyed. The fierce lion will starve, and the cub lioness will be scattered.
Okay. All right. Now they have spoken, haven't they? Okay, now what's your feelings about the first friend here now?
Well, I think he's kind of fed up because he's like, you've been teaching us how to be prosperous and how to be a man of God, but now you feel like you've given up and you're giving us like false hope now because you don't have that same hope as before, and you down here begging for help, and you already had all the maximum help you need. All you got to do is continue to have your faith, but you lost that. So now what should we do? Should we follow you, or should we go on and let you be pitiful for yourself?
So it's a very powerful statement that, people are watching us and they hear all our wise words when things are going well. But now, I guess the stakes are even higher when trouble comes. Because if we can speak all these glorious things about the Lord when things are going well for us, but we didn't lost our job and we're going to get foreclosed on, and our health is questioned and very questionable. Now then, what do you say about God? What do you say about faith? What do you have to say about, your life? And it's impacted his friend here, hasn't it? Because now Job, you're the one. It says, think now in verse 7, who innocent ever perished, or were they upright and cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow reap the same. But beneath God they perish, and by the blast of the anger they are consumed. And so he's talking about that, but I guess earlier when he says, you used to support those who are stumbling in verse 4, and you have made firm the feeble knees, but now it has come to you, and you're impatient. It touches you, and you're dismayed. Is not your fear of God, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways, your hope? So, what do you think about Eliphaz now? Anybody going to recruit him to be one of your friends?
I mean, well, he's being honest with his friend, and honesty is the best policy when it comes to you speaking to your friend. If you've seen your friend go through this and go through that and seen how great of a person they have been, then once trouble hits them, sometimes you have to somewhat remind them of the things that they did and what brought them to the greatness the greatness of when they were great, that you're still great. You just have to continue doing as you were when you were great, when things were perfect and in that perfect painting.
That's good, and that's true. There's also something else that's going on here, and that's a theological point. And you hear that being said there. It says in verse 7, again, that's where I started off the last time. Think now, who that was innocent ever perished? In other words, well, wait a minute now, Job, those who are innocent don't go through this.
Yeah.
And that was the thought process in the day. So if you had to do something, Job, now come on.
Talked about earlier.
Yeah, fess up, Job. Where have you seen the innocent perish? Or where the upright cut off? So now maybe we're learning something about you, Job, that we didn't know before. You had something hidden from us that we didn't see, but the evidence is evidently you weren't as right as we thought you were. And we can hear that too. I always thought, that was just too good to be true about all that stuff they were talking about, praise the Lord and Jesus Christ and all like that. But now look at them, they must have done something to cause this situation. And so that was what they were thinking, and this is what he was expounding on, because that's what they believed. He was speaking to them the belief of that day and time. If you're suffering, you must have done something wrong. And so then what does that say then that we're learning now about that theology? Is that a proper theology? Or have we learned? No. Yeah, it is. So what's a proper theology now then? And we're learning from the lessons of them here. You want to say something?
That God is going to continuously test your faith, and everything negative and positive in your life is because of Him. That He wants you to go through something in order to help the next person get through whatever they're getting through, because He's going to use you as one of His prophets to prophesy to them in a time of need, because you have went through it or you have seen it with your own eyes, so that you'll be a better example to pull them closer to God as you're on your journey as close as you are to God.
If you've had nothing but good times, it's hard for you to minister to somebody
that went through trouble. So you have to go through something in order to help anyone else. Because if everything is good, when somebody goes through something, you're like, okay, pray. And to them, you tell them pray. They're like, okay, well, how do I pray? What do I do to get to this point? How do I get the understanding? If you have no way to show them how to get to the understanding because you've never been there, there's no way that you can even express anything to them. It's like talking to a baby.
Yeah.
You can talk to the baby as much as you want, but if that baby doesn't know any words, you're not going to get anything out of that baby but, a couple of stares or so, Maybe a couple of giggles if it sounds funny to them, but other than that.
Sounds like we're talking to a mother of a baby who knows very, very freshly in her mind what it's like to talk to a baby. Okay. Okay, somebody else.
It's not Eliphaz was not the type of guy that was a friend that would say, Job, ask God what his will is. Encourage him to do that, like Jesus said at the end, whatever your will is, it will be done. But he encourages him to ask God for a miracle. Why don't you just tell God to heal you? That's the kind of guy he sound like to me. He doesn't sound like anybody that would encourage you to say, find out what God's will is, and everything will be all right, you know.
Okay, we're going to need to fast forward now because we're getting near the end of our time. So I want you to go now back to chapter 38, Job 38.
Oh, that is a mess.
There's a lot in Job, a whole lot in Job.
Yeah.
But we want to get to where it starts to conclude and starts to summarize and very insightful. This controversy of God with Job is what we're talking about now. So in chapter 38 verse 1 we start to hear some more. So someone take chapter 38 verse 1 through 12, if you would do that.
The Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, who is this that questioned my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them.
Okay, now where are you now? What chapter are you?
38.
Okay, very good. Keep going.
Where were you when I laid a foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much, do you know how it dimensions were determined, and who did the surveying? What supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstone, as the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who defined the boundaries of the seas as it burst from the womb? And as I clothed it with clouds of thick darkness, for I locked it behind barred gates, limit its shores. I said, thus far and no further will you come. Come here, proud waves must stop. Have you ever commanded this morning to appear and caused dawn to rise in the east? Have you ever told the daylight to spread the ends of the earth, to bring an end to night wickedness? For the futures of the earth take shape as the light approaches, and the dawn is robed in red. The light distributes the haunts of the wicked, and it stops the arms that is raised in violence.
Okay, let's go through 18.
Have you explored the springs from which the seas come? Have you walked about, explored the depths? Do you know where the gates of depths are located? Have you seen the gates uttered gloom? Do you realize the extent of the earth? Tell me about it if you know.
All right. That's your favorite part? Why is that your favorite part?
Because he's like, it's God. He's telling me, I created everything. I made this, and you can't judge me and tell me what I should answer to you about. You should just go as I taught you to go about and just live your life. And if I shall take this away from you or give you that, you should be grateful in what I give you and not question it just because I took it or I gave it to you in the first place.
That's right.
You have to be grateful because I gave it to you or because I took it, and just take it as, oh, it's a blessing from God, and it's gone now, so I have to keep going by faith because God sent me to be this type of person through my life, not just for the time that I'm getting blessings.
Mm-hmm. And so what we're hearing is God's sovereignty, right? Mm-hmm. I am God. Mm-hmm. So I just need you to answer some questions. Mm-hmm. let's just see how much you know, Job. And so I agree with you. I love that part too, because God is so kind, and God is so gentle, and God is so patient. I like God just coming out there once in a while. Just wait a minute. I just need you to answer me some questions, And so it teaches us then the sovereignty of God, that He is sovereign, and that He gives and He takes away. And so therefore, and so what does that teach us about when we have?
You should be grateful and thankful for having it, because you didn't have to have it in the beginning. He gave it to you to see if it because of whatever you were doing before, or a blessing from another part, but you should still be grateful in it because it was given to you.
That's right. So very astute, And therefore, that day that He gives us, be grateful for it. And if He's gracious enough to give you another day, then be grateful for that one too. Because at any given time, I watch the news each morning, and I hear about this car crash, and every once in a while they say, it was a fatality. That person was going to work that day, thinking about what was going to happen on the job, thinking about what was going to happen when they got home, with no sense of understanding that was going to be their last trip and they weren't going to make it to work. And it happens on a regular basis, don't we? We hear the traffic accidents and the overturned trucks, or, someone was accidentally or intentionally shot. So life is precious. And then the people in our life are precious, aren't they? And we have to keep in mind that these relationships that God has afforded us to have are a gift from God. Because at any given time, they can be taken away. And so it gives you a real sense of appreciation if this settles into you, what God is doing. There's one more challenge now then God. Let's take a look at chapter 40, starting in verse 6. Okay, let's go 6 through 14, and we'll conclude with that then.
Then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God? Or canst thou thunder with a voice like Him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud, and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee.
Okay. All right. God comes back again, doesn't He?
Puts him in his place.
Yeah, He does. Yeah, he did. He did challenge him, didn't He? He sure did. read that first part there in verse 6 and 7. Eugene really liked that part.
Then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. In other words, answer me.
He said, all right.
Answer me.
Man up.
Man up, and answer me.
Brace yourself.
You're kidding, God said, if you want to go there, I can go there, I can go further than you can go, And so then we find that it concludes where Job, now it's interesting when you go to chapter 42, verse 10, this is believed to have been a late addition to this account of Job. That there for a long time, it ended in verse 9, 42:9, and then 10 through 17 was added. So someone read that then.
After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord made him prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. All his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought upon him. And each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the first. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. The first daughter he named Jemima, the second Keziah, and the third Karen happened. Now where in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father granted them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. So he died, old and full of years.
Yes. All right. So they kind of fixed it all up so that people could accept it better, you know. But whatever the reason is, it's still a blessing to hear his account and what he went through. Any questions? Okay, we can.
My old age, I love to hear they live happily ever after.
Yeah, a good story ends up with everything coming out well in the end, right? Okay. All right, there's your reading lesson up on the screen, and we'll leave that up there for you. For those at home, we encourage you to continue to read along with us and study along with us. You can read ahead, so it's not too burdensome. Then we're only going to cover the first 2 days. We're getting into Daniel now. Day 1 is 1 through 3, and day 2 is 4 through 6. So we thank God for what his word gives to us, amen, and how it strengthens us and equips us to be able to live this life. It's a blessing. All right, so let's close out like we start out, praising God then. All right, we'll see you all next week.